With me in the studio, our defence and security analyst, Professor Michael Clarke, is here. And interesting listening to Aaron, who, of course, was there at Camp David, the closest we've ever got to peace in the Middle East. Not overly hopeful, but more hopeful because of President Trump's actions than he has been recently.
Yeah. I mean, if this comes off, then President Trump, deserves a great deal of credit. Eccentric though his ways are, if it works, then let's not be churlish about offering the plaudits. But I think, as David was saying there, we're closer now than we've been to for a long time to a resolution of this particular crisis, this part of a generational crisis. But having said that, we're not that close. So, this is better news than we've had for a long time. But there's an awful long way to go yet. But, I mean, in Egypt today, these indirect talks are really pretty direct because, Ron Dermer is there for Israel. He's the presidential advisor to Netanyahu. He's very close to Netanyahu. He's been with him since 1999, the year 2000. Previous negotiations on the Israeli side have featured people like David Barnea, the head of Mossad, and Ronan Bar, the head of Shin Bet, who were very professional, very direct, and so on. But the fact is, Ron Dermer, he knows what Netanyahu will and will not go with. So that's very direct. And on the Hamas side is Khalid Haya, who escaped from the attempted bombing in Qatar on the 9th of September. I mean, the Israelis tried to kill him then. Yeah, exactly. And didn't manage it, although his son was killed in that attack. And he's lost his wife and 5 children to 3 different Israeli air attacks. He probably doesn't value his own life very highly, and he probably doesn't think he's going to hold on to it for too much longer. So he's very authentically Hamas. And he's the only person at the moment who seems to be able to make a decision for Hamas. So you've got the person who's closest to Netanyahu, the person who can really make a decision for Hamas, talking. So these talks may be indirect, but they're as good as we're going to get. And there is enormous pressure on Hamas now to do some sort of deal. In a way, this is Hamas's terms of surrender. I don't think it'll work out that way, but that's the way the rest of the world tends to see it. I think Hamas will still play for time. I think there'll be a process. President Trump is saying end of the week because he wants an agreement to get the hostages out this week, because that would be, whatever happens next, it would look like a triumph if all of the hostages were released this week. As I say, if they are, then Hamas has no bargaining power left, and I don't think Haya will go with that.
And we're marking this anniversary today. How has the last 2 years, how has it also affected the wider war in the Middle East, the escalation of that?
Jane, it's gone in almost a complete circle. I mean, after the atrocity of the 7th of October, 2 years ago, the Israelis, in a sense, absorbed the hurt of that, and the hurt was considerable. I mean, it was the greatest atrocity against Jewish people since the Holocaust itself. So they absorbed that, and then they began to push back. And in a way, they've taken on all of their enemies, first of all, one at a time, and then simultaneously. And so what Hamas obviously hoped in the 7th of October was to create a generalized conflict against Israel, that everyone would rise up on the West Bank, a third intifada, the Hezbollah in Lebanon would rise up, the Iranians would back them. None of that happened. There was instability everywhere, so Hezbollah continued to sort of rocket attack on Israel, but kept it below the level that the Israelis would overreact, and the Israelis sort of went along with that. Iran backed off, didn't know quite what to do, made all the right statements, but didn't do anything especially important. The Houthis in Yemen began a campaign to interfere with shipping and throw rockets at Israel, but that was strategically irrelevant. It was just a nuisance to everybody more than anything else. And the West Bank was extremely volatile. But there was no third intifada, and the Israeli settlers began to move into the West Bank in some force and have continued to do so. And so what's happened in the last year, since September last year, the Israelis launched their attack on Hezbollah. Remember with the Pages attack, where all of these pages that they'd spent a long time getting into the hands of Hezbollah leaders suddenly exploded and injured them, blew their hands off or killed them in some ways. And that decapitated, in effect, the Hezbollah leadership, and Israeli attacked them. Israel, used that moment to launch the attack. In a way, the same sort of thing in Iran. I mean, they attacked Hamas in Iran, in Tehran itself, and the Iranians couldn't do very much about it. There were rocket exchanges between both sides, and then the Israelis attacked, and the Americans helped them, bombing the nuclear facilities in Iran. And Iran has come off the table temporarily. The Houthis, forget about it. They're not important in this respect. So the Israelis, in a sense, have put the boot on the other foot. 2 years later, it's Israel who's calling the shots. in the whole region. And so the Israeli right wing that David was referring to, they said they've got a leadership crisis because Netanyahu is now beholden to the right wing. And the right wingers see October the 7th set off a train of events which has given them the opportunity to go for the Greater Israel, to move into the occupied territories in the West Bank and to finish this phase of the Arab-Israeli conflict with Israel recovering what they call Judea and Samaria.
Interesting stuff. Michael, thank you very much for taking us through all of that.